Hello everybody, in today's video we're going to be giving you a first look at a potential Thanksgiving snowstorm. This is going to be taking place for Thursday, Friday, and into Saturday for parts of the interior Northeast. Otherwise, it'll just be a rain event if you live anywhere that's outside of that white shaded area. It will be colder in these spots, so over the next couple of days, even though there are some indications that by early December it might start turning a little bit warmer, it looks like as of right now, it should be colder at least through the end of the month and maybe even extending a little bit further beyond that. So let's start off with your current weather photo of the day. This one is sent in by Intrepid Explorer. By the way, he does have a YouTube channel, so if you want to check out his YouTube channel, it's that name right there. So if you just type that into YouTube, you'll be able to find his channel, and he does cover some of the weather on there. So I would definitely recommend subscribing if you haven't already. This one was from last April in Columbus, Ohio, showing a big storm which rolled through there, bringing in some lightning, and he actually got some pictures of the lightning. Some really great photos here from him, so thank you for sending those in. If you guys have any other weather photos that you want to send in, especially if we do get any snow in your area, then make sure to send those pictures over and I will feature them. My email address is elitheweatherguyyt@gmail.com, and it's also in the description down below, so just email me those weather photos if you want to have them featured on the channel. So getting into the video, here's the National Weather Service page. You can see that we do have some winter weather advisories up for the Northwest. That includes parts of Washington, Oregon, Idaho, Montana, and Wyoming. We have some freeze warnings up for some parts of California, Arizona, Alabama, Georgia, South Carolina, and North Carolina. We also have a few frost advisories for some parts of California, as well as for southern Alabama, the panhandle of Florida, southeastern Georgia, and some of the surrounding areas. So it is getting fairly far south in terms of the below 32-degree temperatures. We also do have some red flag warnings in effect for parts of Wyoming, South Dakota, Nebraska, Kansas, Oklahoma, Texas, New Mexico, and Colorado, as well as for some parts of southern California. Again, this is just going to be mainly due to wind. We do already have some high wind warnings up in some parts of the Rockies, so that wind combined with a relatively dry atmosphere will allow for some fire danger to be present over those spots. Taking a look at yesterday's extremes, we had a high temperature of 91 degrees in Anaheim, California. The low temperature was -7 degrees in Peter Sinks, Utah. Highest rainfall report of about 4.99 inches of rain in St. Lucie, Florida, and the highest snowfall report was in Twin Lakes, Michigan, and I forgot to change the amount, but the amount of snow they got was about 6.2 inches, not 1.8. So those were the extremes from yesterday. Let's start off with the GFS model. We're going to take a look at the GFS and the European model. And we're just going to basically time you through this. They are fairly similar to each other, so we're not seeing a ton of discrepancy within the models, and that's good news because it does mean that we're going to have a more accurate forecast most likely, and it does mean that there's less variability, there's not as much moving around in the models, so we do have a better idea of what may happen. Your low pressure center is going to start up in Michigan, and it's eventually going to move into Ontario and Quebec. We have some colder air right on the western flank of this system, and that's indicated by those blue lines. So anywhere northwest of this line right here, this is where you're dealing with below 32-degree temperatures. We have high pressure sitting over the southeast, so that's allowing some of that moisture to be streamed up through parts of the central United States and into that low pressure center, which is up into Michigan by this point. Again, these two models, the GFS and the European, are fairly similar, and this will be happening for Thanksgiving and the day after for most areas. Now, again, starting off, it is mostly just a rain event. So for Thursday morning, so for Thanksgiving morning, we're dealing with just rain, anywhere from about Michigan and Ohio down to Texas. Now, if we move this on, you can see that you do see some snowfall developing on the back end of this into parts of Michigan. It is turning much colder, so you're going to start off the day, and when you check your weather apps for Thanksgiving, you're probably going to see a high temperature of around 45 to 55, depending on where you are in the lower Great Lakes. But if you also look at the low temperature on that day, I'm assuming, and just based on what some of these models are showing, they're outputting low temperatures in the 20s. So you're going to go from being in the 50s to the 20s, and that's all going to happen within a relatively short time period once this storm passes by. So once this cold front passes by, you're going to see a lot more cold air spill in on the back end, and where the cold air overlaps with the precipitation is where we're going to end up getting some snowfall. So you can see that most of that snow is northwest of that low pressure system, and that's because that's where all the cold air is currently being kept. This is going to be true also for parts of the interior northeast. So you're going to start off with rain, but by Friday morning, we're going to go back into some snow showers. Again, nothing too heavy, but we will see some snow showers all the way down as far south as the central Appalachians, and then as far north as parts of New York, where we'll be dealing with some of that snow. And then if we move this on a little bit more to Friday evening, the system moves out. We see this cold air rushing in. So this might be one of the coldest days of the season so far for some of these areas. That would be for Friday night and Saturday morning, where you have a sharp blast of cold air, and the wind chills will be much lower as well. Because if you look at this, look how tightly packed these lines of equal pressure are. We have a high pressure, 1024 high pressure down in Louisiana, and then we have a 988 millibar low pressure center, which is right over there. So you would have to shed off basically around 36 millibars or so of pressure within that relatively small distance. It's a fairly big distance, but relative to that, it is a fairly small distance, especially when you consider that the 1020 thickness is right over here and the 990 thickness is right over here. So 30 millibars have to be removed off and have to kind of be equaled out over this area of the Northeast. So in order to do that, you're going to either have to amp up the precipitation rate, or you'll have to amp up the wind. And we're going to actually see a little bit of both, but really mostly the wind. We're going to see wind gusting up near 35 miles per hour on the back end. And you combine this with some relatively cold temperatures on the surface that'll be down into the 20s and teens. So you might have some wind chills down below zero in some of the higher elevations, and for a lot of areas, it'll be in the single digits or the teens in terms of the wind chills or the feels-like temperature. Here would be for Saturday morning, which is November 27th, and we still do have some snow moving into parts of Vermont, New Hampshire, and Maine, so they will still have some snow on the back end, but for the most part, by Saturday afternoon at least, it will be pretty much all said and done with. Here's the European model, just for another reference, but I will warn you guys, these are pretty similar. Really not a lot of a difference between the GFS and the European, which is good news for me because it does make the forecast a lot easier to forecast and to make when we're looking at two models that pretty much agree on the same things. So this would be for Friday morning. You can see that systems up into southern Quebec. We have snow into some parts of the Appalachians, western Pennsylvania, western New York getting in on some snow. You do have some mixing up into northern New Hampshire and northern Maine. That low pressure system then translates down into the Gulf of Maine, and then we have some snow still lingering in on the back end of this. This is going to be much easier to forecast than, if you guys remember, there was a storm that was expected to happen, and I actually did make one video on it. I did not spend a lot of time talking about it because I was still quite suspicious on whether it was actually going to occur or not, and it didn't end up happening. But there was a storm that was actually supposed to happen today and yesterday in parts of the Northeast that would have brought snowfall, and again, I made one video on it talking about what could happen in both scenarios, whether it were or were not to happen. It ended up not happening, but it's a very similar placement of the low pressure system. Both of them were in this Atlantic Gulf Coast area, or not Gulf Coast, but Atlantic coastal area. But the only difference is that we had multiple systems intervening with that one. The other one that we were talking about that had a lot of model uncertainty had one system coming out of the Gulf, another one coming in from over here, and then you also had to see how deep the trough was going to be on the back end and whether it would be potent enough to bring in cold air in time to bring some snowfall. So there were a lot more factors with that storm. In this storm, all we have is a low pressure system, a fairly mild trough relative to this time of year behind it, and pretty much no other weather systems except for that high pressure system in the south. So really, we're not working with a lot of storms or a lot of systems, and that's going to make this the entire forecast less complicated, and it will bring up the model certainty and the model expectation of being correct. This would be for Saturday morning. You can see some wind and also some light to moderate snowfall in the northeast, and then eventually that starts to temper out. If we move this on to the snowfall maps, you can see that the European model is showing a couple inches. Again, this is not going to be a huge storm unless you live in some of the higher elevations of the northeast. So some parts of the Adirondacks, the Green and White Mountains, or northern Maine could get in on quite a bit, as well as for some of these lake effect pockets in parts of Pennsylvania and New York, as well as for parts of northern Michigan. So there are a few spots that could definitely get up near 4, 5, 6 inches of snow, but for the majority of areas, I'm looking at a good 2 to 5 inches of snow, and there might even just be a dusting or so once you get into this zone right here. So it's not going to be a huge storm, but it will bring some snowfall, and I do want to talk about it. There are some systems or some models that are indicating that this system moves off into Nova Scotia, and then we see another little band break off, move to the south, and then bring in another storm on the back end of that, and that would become a little bit more of an interest if you live in the mid-Atlantic or the coastal northeast. So that's what some models are showing, like the European, where it has that scenario and it actually shows snow in those areas. And then we have other models like the GFS, which simply do not have this forming at all. So that's another thing that we have to watch out for. We don't just want to focus on this initial system, because right after that on Monday, there is a threat for another storm if some models are correct. So these could be back-to-back type of systems. Right now, we're just going to focus on the first one, but in the back of my mind, I will be thinking about that next system while this one is going on, because however this one interacts with the Northeast and its pattern, that'll have a big impact on what happens with that next storm, possibly for early next week. Here's the GFS model, and really, again, not a lot of variation. There's a little bit more snow into the northeast, especially if you live up in Quebec. There are some higher totals in eastern Quebec from Montreal to Quebec City, where you could be looking at 2 to 6 inches of snow. So there are some heavier pockets there, but in terms of widespread change, really not a lot. So that is good news. It means that the models are in agreement and that there's not a lot of discrepancy between them. Now, here's one thing that will, of course, be very important when you're looking at rain and snow type of systems, especially systems that go from rain to snow. It's the temperatures. So here's just a random snapshot from Friday morning. The storm by this point is right around here. The cold front is dragging through central Pennsylvania, and we have temperatures on the west end of this, which are going to be down into the 20s and even some teens as you go back into Illinois, Wisconsin, and Minnesota. So it will be colder over further to the west. But you go east of this line, ahead of the cold front before it passes, and you're going to be in the 40s and 30s. And remember, this is Friday morning, so this is the coldest part of the day, and it's going to be in the 40s and the 30s. So not too bad for a November morning. Usually it is colder in these areas, so you might even be running a couple degrees above the average. Once that system were to move by, you would also drop into the 20s as well on the back end. And then by Saturday, once the cold air really becomes potent and moves through, you'll see this air mass, which is up into Ontario, dive down into the northeast and the Great Lakes with less potency. So it's not going to be below zero for a lot of areas, at least in terms of the actual temperatures. Maybe some wind chills below zero, but the actual temperatures will be above zero, definitely. But it will definitely be some of the coldest air that we've seen all season in these areas. So that is something interesting, and at least something that you want to note, that we could see some rather chilly air right behind this system. Here's a look at the upper air map. The system is going to start up near Minnesota and Wisconsin, move into parts of southern Ontario as a fairly deep and potent trough, and then what we're going to see is that we have that system move into the northeast and especially New England as it's making its way to the Gulf of Maine. So it moves from southern Ontario into parts of central New England, at least the upper level low pressure system does. The lower level, or the surface low pressure, is actually taking a northward track before diving to the south. So eventually they will meet up, but there is some disconnect. They are somewhat disconnected in terms of the upper air and the surface low pressure system, so that could cause, of course, some confusion. I don't think it's going to have a big play into how this actually turns out, but it is something that you want to keep in mind, that there are some little things like that could throw off some of the models, maybe by a few miles here and there, in terms of whether this storm is further north or further south, and of course that will have some downstream impacts on the forecast. So I'm not going to make a snowfall forecast just yet, so I'm not going to have one out today, of course, but I will probably have one out either for Wednesday, or since I'm off on Thanksgiving, I might wake up earlier in the morning, probably right around 7 or 8 in the morning Eastern time, and make a video for you guys with the snowfall forecast, and then spend the rest of the day doing the regular Thanksgiving things with my family. But I will definitely have a Thanksgiving video out in the morning, but that might also be one of the videos that I have out there. So I might, for Thanksgiving, have a video with the snowfall forecast out, maybe the updated snowfall forecast, depending on whether I have enough time on a Wednesday to make a snow forecast. So I think I probably should be good, because Wednesday I do have a half day, so tomorrow I have a half day from school, so I get home right around noon, so that should be good, and it'll give me enough time to make a video, and hopefully enough time to also make that snowfall forecast. So I'm going to wait off a few more hours before really diving deep into the models, because they could of course change. I'm not suspecting a lot of change, though. This is a system that looks to stay fairly steady. I didn't want to make a video 2 days ago for Sunday or Monday on this, because I thought, again, maybe this is going to fizzle out. We've seen this a couple times so far where it hasn't really panned out in terms of what's being forecasted in the models actually happening in real life. But the fact that we're only, let's say, 48 or less hours away from the system, and it's still being forecasted with the same amount of certitude, and it's also being showed within every single model, and both the major European and GFS and Canadian models all have a fairly similar beat on this, and they're really showing a fairly similar picture. It does lead me to believe that there is probably some certitude to this, and there will probably not be too much change. So that is going to wrap it up for today's video. If you have any questions or comments, or you want a personal forecast, just leave a comment down below. If you have any weather photos that you want to send in, send them over to my email address, which is in the description down below, and I'll see you guys tomorrow. Goodbye.